taxing wealth also begins to kind of redistribute the balance of power in our society. You can still be rich, but just not as rich as Croesus, maybe.
Now, looking ahead to next week's budget, what are some of your concerns?
Well, one of the things we've raised is the issue of wealth taxes. So we know there are going to be possibly some, but we don't know that they're going to go far enough. And I think given the scale of public debt, 14 years of austerity, 60 years of neoliberalism, cuts to public services, we need a real injection of cash to ensure that we can make the climate transition as just as possible, increase sustainability, but also rebuild our public services. You know, if we're going to have growth, that growth needs to be directed towards the green transition. And at the moment, given the fact that it is looking like there will be real terms cuts to unprotected departments, that means that we need all the money we can get to invest in our future.
What sort of departments are you concerned about? Because I feel like what's been trailed so far is there is actually going to be quite a significant portion of investment.
One of the key areas, I think, for myself is local government. It's so critical to so many aspects, adult social care. It really has been underfunded systemically over the last 15 or so years, and it's coming apart. So I can't think of any area of public life where an investment of cash, an investment of a little bit of love and TLC would go so far in making our country a better place. And I think a lot of people are expecting, when they voted for Labour, they expected real change, and that change was an investment in public services. That's what the foundations were meant to be, and I think that's what they want to see.
The letter that you've written to the Chancellor, it proposes a rather radical change to the tax system. You want to put capital gains in line with income tax. Can you just explain that to me?
So what we have at the moment is a really unfair tax system. We know that for the last, I think it's almost 50 years now, the amount of tax that's come from wealth has remained the same, around about 3.4% of GDP. That's a really small amount, given that over the last 60 years we've seen a burgeoning of people who make their living through wealth acquisition, through financial transactions and speculation. So what we're saying is let's bring the tax system into the 21st century so it better represents where people are making money. And that could be things like, yes, making capital gains tax equal to income tax. You make your living by going to work. That gives you an income. But some people have assets, they have investments to the tune of millions, sometimes billions, and they make a living off of that. Why isn't that taxed at the same rate at which your income is taxed? We think it should be, and we think that could then lead to a massive injection of cash into public services and into the green transition.
I mean, Rachel Reeves has already proposed that she will raise capital gains to 25%. Is that not significant enough for you?
I think given the scale of the challenge, you think about how broken our country is, you think about the problems we're facing. We just had race riots, and I think a lot of people understand there are lots of reasons for them, but one of the reasons was because we have such an unfair, unequal country where there are so many people who feel left behind. To turn that around, we need every single penny we can get. And if that means equalising income tax and capital gains tax, then so be it. But that would raise extra billions. But we've also asked for things like putting on a small surcharge, a small tax onto wealth of people with assets of more than 10 million. That could raise £24 billion a year. Now, those are quite large figures. And when you begin to invest that year after year into public services, we can actually get our public services onto the front foot, rather than a drip feed of a little bit more cash here, a little bit more cash there, so they're kind of barely keeping their head above water. We can get onto the front foot and begin investing in people, in our country, and in the just transition, which I think people want to see. So I'd say just transition, I mean in sustainability, in green technologies.
But what do you think would happen to business if you raised capital gains to, say, 40%? What do you think would happen to business? Would they leave the United Kingdom?
So I think it can be staggered. I think you can look at, for example, we know small businesses contribute so much, small and medium-sized businesses contribute so much in terms of jobs, in terms of income to the local community. So, I think it can be something that we can think about carefully and we can target it. But there are large corporations, there are large businesses, wealthy individuals who could be paying more. And I would put it back to them. Think about the kind of country you live in. Think about the kind of country your children and your family live in. Do you want this country to be a better country, a country that's fairer, a country where your children feel safe, where your family feels safe? That's what we all want. And I think that means that we require that investment to be able to make our country a fairer place. We're one of the most unequal countries in the G7. We need to change that. We need to be a fairer country. And The thing about taxation and taxing wealth is we also know wealth equals power. If you have more wealth, you have more power. You can buy think tanks. You can own social media platforms. You have more of a political say. So taxing wealth also begins to kind of redistribute the balance of power in our society. I think that's really important as well. I think it will make for a fairer country. And I think a lot of millionaires, multimillionaires and billionaires also want to live in a safe world, a world that their children can inherit, that is one they can live on and live, cheek by jowl with their neighbours without, all kinds of problems that we're seeing at the moment. So this makes for a better country. You can still be rich, but just not as rich as Croesus, maybe.
Would you support a change in the fiscal rules that would mean that public services, didn't account towards the national debt?
So I think there are lots of different fiscal rules that are being thought about. Some of them to do with the Bank of England and quantitative easing. Some of them are about how we consider assets. So for example, you know that you have a debt. Some people have a debt called a mortgage, okay? But you have your home as the asset. So you kind of, in your own mind, psychologically, okay, I've got this big, massive debt of hundreds of thousands of pounds possibly, but I also have the asset underneath it, the home. I own the home. And so that means that you offset it in your mind. And this is about making sure that the state does the same. At the moment, one of the fiscal rules that we're looking at is saying when the state invests in renewables, say, a great big shiny new wind turbine, at the moment, the Treasury only sees that as a cost. It doesn't see it as an investment. It doesn't see it as something giving a return, not just to the Treasury, but also to our economy in terms of something called the multiplier effect. It creates jobs. It takes maintenance. You have to pay someone. That money goes into the economy. So that kind of change, making sure that we see our state investments as assets and not just costs, I think makes complete sense because everyone understands they are assets and they're to the benefit of all of us.
Today we've seen the early release of another 1,000 prisoners. We've got a big issue at the moment with not enough prison spaces. Would you allow prison to be built in your constituency?
So I've already got a prison just outside of my constituency, Norwich Prison, HMP Norwich. Yes, I would, but you know what? Prisons aren't the answer. They deal with the symptoms. And I think, if we're going to have a prison building program, I'd also like to see an equal amount of investment or more in our probation service. I'd like to see more investment in our schools, in our younger people, bring back Sure Start centres, invest in people, give them a life chance. I always remember the story of a Salvation Army colonel, and I said to him, I was embarrassed to ask the question, we were going to see the homeless on the streets of Norwich for the soup kitchen. And I said to him, do these people choose to be homeless, to be drug addicts, to be prostitutes, to be people who end up in criminality, many of them, not all of them, but many of them? And he thought about it and he said, no. He said, I tell you what, when I go into the primary schools in your constituency, Clive, and I look at those little faces in some of the most socially deprived areas, do I think, I know statistically some of these children will end up in crime, will end up in prison. Do they choose that life? Of course they don't. But those choices are made for them from the lack of opportunities that they have, the choices that we as teachers, as a state, as parents make for them. We need to give those children more chances so that they have more chances not to end up in prison, so they can contribute to our society. That's where the investment should go. If you're building prisons, you're failing. And I think, so yes, I would accept more prisons, but actually only if we had the consequent investment elsewhere downstream so that my constituents, those little 7-year-olds looking up at me, weren't going to end up there in the first place.